The calculus of silence. The Galactic Council chamber was silent for exactly 17 seconds. That silence was louder than any alarm. Councillor Mixthar, a Faxian elder whose iridescent exoskeleton reflected the harsh illumination of the chamber, finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of 300 years of diplomatic service. 67 million, he said flatly. The Vothrak have eliminated 67 million Selvan civilians in the past 14 days. The bombardment continues as we speak. Around the massive circular table, representatives from every major interstellar power shifted uncomfortably. The Tyrixian delegation had already called for direct intervention twice, only to be voted down. The collective, a hive mind species, that thought in perfect unity, remained still, processing data through channels humans could never understand. The Sylv merchants, ever calculating, were silent, recognizing that economic sanctions meant nothing to an invading force actively committing genocide. The Vothrak demand territory, added Councillor Vren, a Kalian whose crystalline form fractured the light into 1,000 points. They claim the Selvan territories are historically theirs, a false claim but one they're willing to defend with orbital strikes. Admiral Soren Kall, representing the Coalition Defense Force, leaned forward. We have 6 battle groups within 3 weeks' travel. We could risk an escalation that brings us into direct conflict with the Vothrak Empire, interrupted Councillor Mixthar. An empire with 3 times our current fleet strength. The vote has spoken. We do not commit our military forces. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. A galactic body formed specifically to prevent galactic-scale conflicts was choosing inaction while an entire civilization burned. Dr. Elena Vostrowski monitored the debate from an isolated communications terminal in the corner of the chamber. As head of the Terran diplomatic corps, she'd seen enough council sessions to know when logic had been abandoned in favor of self-preservation. She was reviewing casualty reports transmitted real-time from Selvan when a soft chime indicated an incoming priority message from Earth Command. The message was simple. Transmit immediately to Ambassador Vasquez. Code Red Vasquez was in her quarters aboard the UES Sovereign Hope, Earth's primary diplomatic vessel. She received the message within moments. The data made her stomach tighten. The latest casualty figures, the Council's refusal to intervene, the continued bombardment of populated centers. Ambassador Kira Vasquez was 47 years old, born in the colony worlds of Kepler 442b. She had negotiated trade agreements with species that communicated through electromagnetic pulses. She had brokered peace between 3 different factions of the collective consciousness. But she had never, in her entire career, felt this level of helplessness. She pulled up the live feed from Selvan's capital city. The camera source was a human agricultural station that had been established there 6 months ago. The feed showed orbital strikes illuminating the night sky, each detonation bright enough to be seen in daylight. She could see the thermal bloom from atmosphere-piercing weapons, the way the air seemed to ripple with each impact. And she knew what those numbers meant. 70,000 per detonation. Her mathematics told her there had been over 900 strikes in the past week. She opened a secure line to Admiral Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Command, stationed at the Lunar Fortress. I'm seeing the feed, Chen said before she could speak. His voice was steady, but she knew him well enough to recognize the anger beneath. 6 minutes ago, they bombed a hospital complex in the secondary city. 1,600 people. The Council won't authorize a response, Vasquez said quietly. I'm not asking for authorization, Chen replied. I'm asking if you want to give them one. Vasquez understood what he was really asking. There were protocols, the Human Accord Protocol, dormant since the first Earth-Space Alliance Treaty. There was the Defense Charter, designed for situations where galactic law broke down and the fundamental rights of sentient life were ignored. There was, in other words, a way to act. Play it for me, she said. The feed, now. As her screen filled, with the live imagery of Selvan's agony, Vasquez made a decision that would echo across star systems for centuries. She walked back into the council chamber. The debate was still ongoing, mostly variations on the same theme. Too risky, too costly, Not our responsibility. She waited for an opening and stepped up to her speaking position. Ambassadors of the Galactic Council, she said, her voice steady and clear. I formally invoke Article 7 of the Human Accord Protocol, Section 3, the Earth Defense Charter. Humanity has determined that active genocide constitutes an intolerable violation of sapient rights. Effective immediately, Earth responds to this crisis as a matter of emergency humanitarian intervention. The chamber erupted. Councillor Mixthar's exoskeleton flickered with agitated colors. Vren's crystalline form refracted wildly. The Tyrixian delegation actually stood, their scaled forms suddenly aggressive. You can't invoke an ancient protocol without a vote, Mixthar protested. The protocol requires only one condition: evidence of active genocide and a formal declaration from any human representative of ambassador status or higher, Vasquez replied. I am providing both. We are acting. She raised her communications device. One short message. Begin deployment Alpha. On Earth, in orbital shipyards across the planet, from the Pacific construction rings to the lunar factories to the asteroid refineries, a standing order suddenly activated. An order that hadn't been given since the foundation of the Human Defense Force 200 years ago. The first warship to launch was the UES Tenacity, a capital-class carrier measuring 3.2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its displacement was calculated in gigatons. Its reactor core burned with the power of a small sun. From the cargo bays of the shipyard, it detached and within moments began charging its FTL drive. Behind it came others. The irresistible, steadfast, unbreakable, names chosen by a young species that had learned its greatest strength, came not from individual power, but from collective will. Each warship was a masterpiece of engineering and purpose designed with one principle. If humans ever chose to protect someone, nothing in the galaxy would stand in their way. 347 capital-class vessels began the calculations for their jump to Selvan space. Another 2,000 support ships, destroyers, cruisers, logistical vessels, prepared to follow. Medical ships, supply carriers, engineering vessels. Humanity didn't just have warships. Humanity had an entire civilization ready to deploy. Admiral Chen stood in the command center, watching the holographic representation of his fleet assembling. His subordinates worked in controlled silence, performing their duties with the precision of people who understood they were about to change history. On the council station, Vasquez watched the councilors' reactions with absolute calm. Some looked shocked, some looked angry. A few seemed to understand what they'd just allowed. Councillor Vren, the Kalian, spoke quietly across the comms. What have we done? Vasquez didn't answer. She was watching the tactical display showing the Terran fleet reaching their FTL entry point. The problem, she finally said to no one and everyone, is that you thought we wouldn't act because you didn't ask us to. You were wrong. When millions of children burn in orbital fire, the question isn't whether we're invited. The question is how quickly we can arrive. The first Terran vessel began its jump. Behind it, like an avalanche of starlight, the others followed. In her quarters, Vasquez watched the live feed from Selvan one more time. She saw another strike bloom across the darkened landscape. But now, in the corner of the frame, something new appeared. The charging signature of an FTL entry point. Help was coming. Within 72 hours, Earth would remind the galaxy of something they'd forgotten, that there are forces in the universe far more powerful than weapons. There are those who choose to protect, and when they choose completely. The weight of thunder. The Vothrak Command Center was bathed in the glow of tactical displays showing the subjugation of Selvan territory. General Sharketh studied the progress reports with satisfaction. Another planetary city falling to orbital assault. Another population center gone. The Selvan were resilient, inconveniently so, but resources were infinite and the Vothrak will was absolute. How long until full territorial occupation? Sharketh asked his tactical officer, a younger Vothrak named Krell. 3 weeks, General. Perhaps 2 if we increase bombardment intensity. Krell replied. The Selvan have no orbital capability, no defense platforms. They're defenseless. Good. Sharketh settled back into his command chair. And the council ships? Still maintaining distance. The collective and the Tyrixian delegation are protesting, but they won't move. They never do. Sharketh allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was how galactic politics worked. Strength was the only language that mattered, and the Vothrak had strength in abundance. Another strike was being prepared, this time targeting the capital's water purification complex. Why kill soldiers when you could eliminate entire cities? He never saw the space distortion that appeared on his outer sensors. One moment, the Vothrak sensor array was displaying normal background radiation. The next, it was screaming warning klaxons as 347 massive objects materialized in the Selvin system, like the arrival of a second sun. Unknown contacts. Krell's voice cracked with alarm. Capital-class vessels, multiple unknown configurations, numbers still. He went silent, watching his displays update. General, I count 347 capital class, 2,134 support craft. FTL's signature matches the human technological parameters. Sharketh stood. The humans? That's impossible. They're months away from. General, the lead vessel is transmitting on all frequencies. The communications array crackled to life. The voice that came through was calm, authoritative, and utterly without mercy. This is Admiral Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Command, representing the United Humanity Defense Force. You are occupying the sovereign territory of the Selvin Collective. You have 60 seconds to cease all hostile action and begin withdrawal of all military forces, or face the consequences of your refusal. Sharketh's face contorted. This is a bluff. Humanity has no authority here. They're outside their 30 seconds, the voice interrupted. Sharketh looked at Krell. Launch everything. These primitive newcomers have no idea who they're facing. The Vothrak have crushed empires older than Earth's civilization. Let them see what real power looks like. Krell's fingers flew across his display. Somewhere in the Vothrak fleet, weapon stations came online. 42,000 striking craft launched toward the Terran vessels. Missiles, energy weapons, plasma ordnance, the full arsenal of the Vothrak. Military machine, it took 8 seconds for them to travel 1 million kilometers toward the human fleet. The first wave of Terran point defense systems activated. The reaction was immediate and absolute. 347 capital ships, each carrying weapons systems that had been refined by human engineers across 2 centuries, opened fire in perfect unison. 93% of the Vothrak strike force was destroyed in the first salvo. 31,000 Vothrak combat pilots, soldiers and weapons officers ceased to exist in the interval between one heartbeat and the next. Sharketh watched his tactical display fragment into chaos. Icons representing his strike force simply vanished. Return fire! All weapons, now! The remaining Vothrak vessels attempted to retaliate. Their weapons fired, and passed harmlessly through the space where Terran ships had been seconds before. The human vessels simply moved, sliding through space with a grace that defied their massive size. It was like watching mountains dance. The Terran response was not as swift because it didn't need to be. The humans weren't rushed. They were methodical. They were inevitable. The UES Tenacity weapons array locked onto the Vothrak flagship. Admiral Chen's voice came through again, this time quieter, somehow more terrifying. I gave you a chance. The energy beam that emerged from the Terran flagship's primary cannon was visible even from the surface of Selvin. It was a line of pure devastation, a path of annihilation carved through space itself. When it struck the Vothrak flagship, the vessel simply ceased to be. Not damaged, erased. 3 kilometers of Vothrak military engineering, reduced to expanding clouds of cooling plasma. In the command center that had been underground, Sharketh felt the blast wave. The floor bucked beneath him. Emergency lighting flickered. Krell stared at the tactical display. General, our entire battle group. I'm reading almost complete losses. The remaining ships are transmitting again, the communication officer whispered. Admiral Chen's voice filled the chamber once more, and now it carried something worse than anger. It carried judgment. You are defeated. Your forces are destroyed. Any further resistance results in total annihilation. Cease all combat operations immediately, or every Vothrak vessel in this system will be eliminated. You have 30 seconds. There was no calculation, no bluff. Sharketh could see that now. The humans weren't trying to intimidate him. They were simply stating facts. Facts about military capability, facts about will, facts about what happened when you decided to burn children in their homes, and accidentally invited an entire civilization to respond. He gave the order to stand down. Across the Selvin system, the bombardment ended. Vothrek soldiers stopped their assault. Invasion forces began coordinated withdrawal. And above the atmosphere, the Terran fleet maintained position, a wall of steel and purpose that would not be moved. On the Galactic Council station, the chambers had descended into absolute chaos. Councilors were shouting, demanding explanations, threatening diplomatic actions. But beneath the noise, there was something else, a collective realization they had made a mistake. They had judged humanity as young, undeveloped, emotional. They had seen the human request to join the galactic community as a novelty. And so they had left one stone unturned when the Vothrak began their invasion. They hadn't asked, what happens when you try to commit genocide in the face of a species that asks for permission before defending someone, rather than forgiveness afterward? Councillor Vren addressed the chamber. I move that we formally recognize Earth's intervention as a humanitarian action, outside the normal protocols due to our failure to act. No one voted against it. On Selvin, the surface was still burning. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble. The death toll would eventually be counted in the hundreds of millions. But the bombardment had stopped. The invasion had halted. And that was because one species had chosen to answer with force. Not for conquest, not for resources, not for territory. But because the alternative was to watch children burn. Admiral Chen stood in his command center watching the tactical displays. His job was already becoming harder, not the military part, which was finished, but the humanitarian part, which was just beginning. He opened a broadcast on all frequencies. To the people of Selvin, this is Admiral Marcus Chen, Earth Defense Command. Your crisis is ending. Our medical vessels are beginning orbital descent. Our engineers are preparing to restore your infrastructure. We are here not as your masters, but as your aid. Stand strong. Help is arriving. On the surface, a young Selvin female, one of the survivors of the bombardment, emerged from a collapsed shelter. Around her, the landscape was scarred with the marks of orbital strikes. Bodies lay uncounted. But above, descending through the atmosphere like falling stars, she saw them, Earth's ships dropping from orbit to land among the ruins. The first one she saw was the UES Mercy, a medical vessel designed specifically for crisis response. As its landing thrusters kicked up dust and debris, the ship's massive cargo doors opened. Humans began emerging, thousands of them, not soldiers, engineers, medics, volunteers, people who had spent the past 36 hours preparing medical equipment, gathering supplies, organizing rescue operations. A human medic, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, knelt beside the Selvin survivor. I'm Dr. Sarah Webb, she said in perfectly translated Selvin language. You're injured. Let me help you. The young Selvin didn't answer at first. She could only stare at this human woman, trying to understand a world where strangers crossed the galaxy to help when no one had asked them to. Why? She finally whispered. The doctor smiled, not unkindly. Because you were hurt and we could help. That's enough. It was in that moment, watching a human woman use her own body to shield a Selvin child from falling debris while medics carried them toward awaiting medical transport, that the galaxy finally understood. Humanity hadn't come to rule. They hadn't come to conquer. They had come because a threshold had been crossed. The threshold between acceptable diplomatic disagreement and unacceptable violence against the innocent. And when that threshold was crossed, humanity responded not with negotiation, but with protection. The Vothrak would be tried for their crimes. The Selvin would heal slowly, painfully, but supported by those who chose to stay rather than simply offer sympathy and depart. And the galaxy would remember this lesson. Sometimes the most powerful thing a civilization can do is not to dominate, but to defend. Not to conquer, but to heal. On the command deck of the UES Tenacity, Admiral Chen received a message from the collective's representative on the council. The text was simple. Thank you. We forgot what mercy looked like. Humanity has reminded us. Chen read the message, and for the first time since the battle began, he allowed himself to rest. The hard part wasn't over. The real work, rebuilding, healing, preventing the Vothrak from simply mobilizing again, that was all ahead. But for now, in this moment, the burden of choice had been answered. Humanity had been asked a simple question through the Council's inaction. Do you care enough to act? And Earth's answer, delivered in the form of 347 capital ships descending through the stars, had been clear, unwavering, and absolute. Yes.